Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be recapping Day 6 of the NHL Play-Ins. Just 3 games here tonight, mostly because of the fact that the Carolina Hurricanes would have had a Game 4 here if they had not swept the New York Rangers. So the first one of the night was the Canucks versus the Wild. This series came in tied at 1, and the Canucks managed to get the 2-1 lead to put themselves in a position to eliminate the Wild for their next game. And it was a solid game from the Canucks. They managed to get the shutout. It took a while to get the first goal of this game, but finally Brock Besser would be able to break through. Eventually Roussel would add to it to make it 2-0, and then an Elias Pettersson goal late in the third period would make it 3-0 and put it away for them. So of course, looking back at Game 1, it was the Wild shutting out the Canucks by this score, and now here in Game 3, the Canucks are managing to do so, and that is really the good news here for the Canucks, is that they have improved pretty substantially over the course of this series thus far. In Game 1, they looked a bit out of sorts. They couldn't get a goal past Alex Stalock. In Game 2, it was looking quite solid, though it was a rough finish. In Game 3, it was pretty decent all around. Some good play from the Canucks to get that victory. The only real bad news that I could say from the Canucks side is, I guess, sort of their discipline, but that's a bit hard to say. The referees were extremely tough in this game for whatever reason on both teams. It seemed to just be minors, and more minors called on both of these teams. It felt like we were just never going to get any 5-on-5 hockey. It always seemed to be some sort of 5-on-4, 4v5, 4-on-4. It was just sort of a strange game from the referees. However, the fact remains is that the Wild are in a tough position offensively, and so you do want to keep them off the power play as much as possible so you can continue to limit their opportunities offensively. And as such, even if the refereeing is a bit of an obstacle here, the Canucks should try especially to just take a few less penalties. The good news for the Minnesota Wild, well, there isn't much going for them. I guess Stalock has remained to be pretty solid thus far through these past couple of games, and I guess the Wild's defense has also remained to be pretty decent thus far. But the big problem, and of course the bad news for the Wild, is this offense. We are now another game into this series, so 3 games in, and the Wild have still yet to score an even strength goal. In fact, well, they just didn't actually score at all in this game, and so these offensive troubles continue for the Minnesota Wild. They just can't seem to beat Jacob Markstrom, who was a huge bright spot for the Canucks in this game. And so I'm not really sure what the course of action is here for the Wild. Right now, they're sort of just hoping that some goal-scoring spark happens through some of their players, but besides, I guess, Fiala, who himself didn't have that great of a game here tonight either, there just really hasn't been much of an offensive spark from any of these Wild forwards. So that has been pretty disappointing to see. And right now, the Canucks really seem to be on their way to finishing them off. On to the next game. It was the Blue Jackets for the Maple Leafs. A very, very interesting one, absolutely. The Maple Leafs got the early lead. Well, not that early, but first period lead 1-0 off of a Cody Ceci shorthanded goal. Eventually Nylander would make it 2-0, and then Robertson would make it 3-0 with his first ever NHL goal coming here in the playoffs. And it looked like with a 3-0 lead, not only would the Leafs take this game and finish it off well, but they might even be able to take control of the series and finish off the Blue Jackets there. But instead, we had to recall what the Blue Jackets managed to do just last season. They were down 3-0 after the first period against the Tampa Bay Lightning, the best team in the league, one of the best teams of all time through the regular season, and yet they managed to not only come back in that game, but finish off the Lightning in the series 4-0, and they did a similar thing here tonight. They slowly clawed their way back in, goals from Dubois, then from Jones, then from Dubois again, and they brought it to overtime before a Dubois hat-trick goal would get the Blue Jackets the victory, a hard-fought comeback victory from the side of the Blue Jackets, and the Maple Leafs were left shocked with the fact that they ended up losing this game. So the good news for the Blue Jackets is, of course, that they managed to show a ton of resiliency, a ton of heart in this game. Their top players like Dubois, Jones, Werenski are playing like their top players. It seemed to be a bit of a disaster in this offseason when the Blue Jackets lost not only Panarin, not only Bobrovsky, but also Duchesne, a player they had traded for at the trade deadline. They likely wanted to sign at least a couple of these players, and yet all of them walked away. And so the Blue Jackets would have needed some of their other top players to really step up, and in this game in particular, they really did. Jones and Werenski have been really good throughout the series. Dubois himself, maybe only so much in this game, though he was decent in the first couple, but very much was a bright star for the Blue Jackets here tonight. And as I said, it left the Maple Leafs a bit shocked. The bad news for the Blue Jackets, I guess, would have to look at the goaltending. Of course, the Blue Jackets came into this series with two, it seemingly were capable goaltenders. They decided to go with Korpisalo, who was a bit more tested, had a bit more experience, at least in the regular season. And through the first couple of games, that looked like a great choice. He was looking very, very good. But here in this one, after he let in 3 goals to the Leafs, he ended up getting pulled, and Merzlikins ended up stepping in. And Merzlikins was perfect in relief, did not let in a single goal, and as such, I suspect Merzlikins will be given Game 4. But the problem remains the similar one that I had mentioned with Darcy Kemper of the Arizona Coyotes, is that neither of these goaltenders, and Merzlikins especially, are not really playoff battle tested. And I just don't know, once it comes down to it, what if the Leafs do improve and Matthews, Tavares, Marner are really peppering, can Merzlikins sort of hold up and withstand that style of pressure? I'm not sure if that's going to be the case, and the fact remains that if Merzlikins then fails, well, the Blue Jackets don't really have a third goaltender to fall back on, and so they'll sort of be rotating between the two of them, and one of them is going to have to stick. We'll see if Korpisalo is given an opportunity to bounce back, or if Merzlikins will be the guy to ride for the Jackets. The good news for the Maple Leafs is still that, players like Matthews, like Tavares, like Marner, they're still there, they're still skilled, they're still playing pretty well, I guess you could say, although they certainly fell off a bit after that 3-0 lead was secured by the Maple Leafs, but they are still likely the 3 most skilled forwards in this playoff series. Even though Dubois looked really, really good here tonight, he just doesn't really compare to those 3 players. You could even add Nylander potentially to that list. So the Maple Leafs do still have the innate skill, but can they use it? I'm not entirely sure. Because that brings us to the bad news. It was something I mentioned the other day about the Calgary Flames and that they were a very inconsistent team. The Toronto Maple Leafs are very, very similar in that regard. We could see a Toronto Maple Leafs who are like world beaters, just seemingly in sync with each other, connecting perfect passes with beautiful shots from the likes of Auston Matthews, who we know has a perfect snipe, basically. And yet sometimes we also see them completely out of sync and just looking like an AHL minor team. And often we actually get those 2 looks of the Maple Leafs in only a single game, like we did here tonight. They looked very good early, but then they just completely fell off late. I mean, they just were not that great there in the overtime either. The Blue Jackets were in control of the overtime until they scored that goal to get the victory. And so that's a problem for the Maple Leafs. They really need to iron out a bit of that consistency. They are the better team on paper, but it just seems like the Blue Jackets continuously outwork them and have a higher sort of effort through these games. And then finally, the final game was the Flames versus the Jets. The Jets were in the elimination game, and unfortunately for them, they ended up losing 4-0 to the Flames. The Flames will be the second team joining the Carolina Hurricanes to move on to the top 16 from the play-in rounds. And this was just, of course, still the unfortunate situation for the Jets, very heavily injured, and the Flames managed to take full advantage of that, getting this shutout. Dubé scored rather early here in this first period. It would be eventually added to by Sam Bennett, and then Monahan and Anderson would get empty netters to close it out 4-0. So as I said, pretty rough for the Jets. Good news for the Flames is that things seem to be rolling. It's not necessarily their fault that the Jets got completely injured, but it's good on the Flames that they were able to capitalize mostly, besides Game 2, on this situation and get themselves in a good position moving on to the next round. Unlike the Carolina Hurricanes, who I said might have too many days off, the Flames getting just a couple here, probably about 3 or 4, I would say 4, is going to do them probably some good, if I had to say. And also, it should be mentioned that Cam Talbot has been very good for the Calgary Flames, of course, getting the shutout here tonight. And a lot of the forwards for the Flames that in the past have shown tendencies to maybe choke a bit in the playoffs and not really show up have been pretty good, maybe not great, but they have been apparent, and maybe they'll be able to carry that further on. The only bad news for the Flames here is that they came up against the Jets team that ended up being extremely shorthanded rather early on in this series. They were not playing a Scheifele Jets. They were not playing a Laine Jets. It was a situation where the Flames didn't necessarily get really heavily tested through these play-in rounds. And so I'm unsure how to really gauge their power level moving on into the next round. Are they going to be ready enough, battle tested enough when they play off against one of these really tough round robin teams? If they face off against a team like the Avalanche or like the Golden Knights or like the St. Louis Blues, will they just get completely shell-shocked for the first couple of rounds because maybe the Jets, a short-handed Jets team, didn't necessarily prepare them enough? So it could be some bad news for the Flames moving forward. From the Jets' perspective, like I did with the Rangers, the Jets' future is still quite bright. They've got a great goaltender in net with Connor Hellebuyck. He was potentially the league's best goaltender during the regular season this year. He's still quite young. Scheifele will be back from injury. He's still quite young. Patrick Laine, Nikolai Ehlers, Kyle Connor, very young forwards, very skilled forwards. Blake Wheeler is getting a bit up there in age, but he's still quite strong. The Jets do still have a bit of holes on defense, but Josh Morrissey at the very least is looking quite good for them. He's been very good for a while. And so the future is still quite bright for the Jets. And of course, like with the Rangers, they now have a 1 in 8 chance of getting the first overall pick in this coming draft, which is of course a huge thing. I mean, on that topic, it seems as though that if some of these 2-1 series just sort of finish out 3-1, we could see a team like the Penguins or the Oilers or the Predators or the Jets get this first overall pick, which is just absolutely insane. A team like the Penguins, who are 3 years removed from winning back-to-back Stanley Cups and still have fantastic talent on their team and are far and away one of the better teams in the NHL. If they get upset here in this first round, they have a decent chance of getting Lafreniere. If the Predators or the Oilers actually end up getting upset in this first round, they have a decent chance. So, as I said, pretty flawed system, but good news, I guess, for the teams that do get eliminated. In terms of predictions, I had the Canucks in 5 games. They're now leading their series 2-1. It seems as though the Canucks might be able to finish this one out in 4, but if the Wild do show some fight, this could be a prediction that I do get correct. I had the Maple Leafs in 3 games. That is completely out of the window now. The Blue Jackets are ahead 2-1, so while the Leafs could technically still win this series, the Blue Jackets got more games than I thought they would. And then in the final series, I had the Jets in 4 games. I could not have really foreseen the fact that they'd get so heavily injured, and so the Flames ended up winning in 4 games, but still, it is a prediction that ended up being incorrect. Class dismissed.